This is the Let's Go Win podcast with your host, JM Ryerson.
What's happening, you guys? Welcome back to Let's Go Win podcast, where we are here to help you be happy, healthy, wealthy. And I think we're going to knock all three of those off today with the gentleman that I'm bringing on. He is awesome at helping people really thrive in their business, which in turn helps their personal life, which in turn helps their health. So that's what we're going to do today. Mike Ficara is an experienced entrepreneur and consultant specializing in growth and scaling strategies for businesses. With a diverse background in various industries, he has gained insights into learning, leadership, and motivation for success. Through his expertise, he has helped numerous businesses achieve significant growth and stability. Mike is also the author of Like Socks on a Rooster. I love that name, brother. That's awesome.
Yeah,
how are you?
Thank you. Good, man. Can't complain. Appreciate the introduction. So I don't know if we're going to do the healthy part, though. That's the only thing. I don't know about the healthy part, but we'll get into that.
Well, I mean, look, you're making me laugh. I love the name of the book. And I have to ask just straight away,
For sure.
Socks on a Rooster. You don't hear that every day. What does that mean? Where in the world did that come from, brother?
You know, the backstory on it is my father, and I talk about this in this book, great hero of mine, great mentor of mine my entire life. And we were growing up, we didn't always have a lot of money. So my dad would rearrange the furniture in the house in order to like make things seem or feel new. So every time we would do that, he, once we would get it just in the right place, he would say, all right, like socks on a rooster. And as I became an adult, I was actually a teacher, and I'm sure we'll dig into that a little bit. And then, I would say it to my students sometimes, or say when things happen as an adult, people would look at me like I had two heads, and they're like, what does that mean? I'm like, when something goes well, you say like socks on a rooster. And they're like, that makes no sense. So as I started my entrepreneurial journey, I realized a lot of people were saying things that didn't make sense and they didn't know what they meant. And maybe they had heard it before. It was an entrepreneurial cliche. So I called the book that because instead of saying, the entrepreneurial guide to success, I figured, A, it's a more catchy title and people are going to ask you about it. And B, it shows that you got to know what you're saying and what it means. And it may mean something different to people. So it's more about what you do than what you say, and understanding what you say and the actions behind it. So it's about busting those entrepreneurial cliches that hold you back and allowing you to become massively successful.
I like it. I think it's a trademark for you, or certainly your dad, because I had never heard the thing, and It is fascinating. Let's dive in for just a second with your dad's mentality on this. We're going to change it up. Maybe an upgrade is what I would call that, so that it feels new. It feels different. What was the idea behind that, brother? Because I've never heard somebody saying, all right, maybe our means aren't, that we're going to go buy a new home, but instead we're just going to kind of change it up internally. What was that all about?
Yeah, I think my kids are lucky because, my wife, will lay in bed at night and scroll the stores for the things she wants to buy or look at. My mom used to drag us to the mall and just look at stuff and never buy anything. And every time we left, she'd be like, Mom, what are you doing? Like, why are you taking? Well, I just want to look at it. We can't afford it. But, I want to know when I can. And even my dad, like, we would go to furniture stores and we look at furniture. And I mean, just years, not even months, years on end. And what I realize now as an adult, I don't think I realized as a kid, that was kind of like dream building and goal setting, right? They were looking at things, manifesting what they wanted, working towards it and working hard. And the idea was seeing it, experiencing it, feeling it. My dad was the kind of guy that would test drive a car 100 times before he'd buy it. And I always thought that's just because he was picky. I think that's still part of it. He's still very, he always says I'm very anal. I could say it because he says it. But I think it was the idea of just manifesting and dream building, and that's why he did it. And I think the shaking up and moving in the furniture or the trying different things, he was actually beta testing. What would the new furniture look like? How would it fit? What if we tried this configuration? It was a way of changing new things and kind of seeing, what he wanted to do. And like I said, I think it was a kind of goal setting, manifesting and building as he was moving along. I see it as an adult. Definitely didn't see it as a kid, though.
I think it's really cool, though, to be resourceful, to show your kids that it's not about materialistic items, because this is a fond memory for you to look back and say, I didn't give a shit if we had money or not. I cared that my dad was being creative and showing us these things. And my mom would take us to the mall so that we could really know what we're striving for. These aren't really lessons that, we think about for a kid. Like, I don't know if your mom and dad are going, you know what, someday Mike's going to remember moving the furniture as a positive, but what a cool experience that both your parents did to really shape your thinking? And I guess I'll dive into it. Is that kind of what did shape your thinking as you got into this entrepreneur world, is some of these lessons you learned from mom and dad?
I think I'm a father of four, right? So I think a lot of parenting is there's what we think we're doing, and then there's what we're actually doing. I think a lot of what we do that we think we're doing for our kids, and I think even my parents, a lot of what they thought they did was uh, helping me be better really wasn't, but the things that they didn't think they were doing, like the moving the furniture. I always say my parents got involved in Amway when I was a young kid, so I got to be around that network marketing environment a little bit, and the MLMs, and Les Brown, and I heard from all these guys when I was a little kid. My parents were listening to tapes. This is before podcasts. They were listening to like all these white Amway tapes they were always putting in. And you'd hear, and I talk about it in this book as well. I was I think they started, I must have been like 11 or 12 years old. They joined Amway. And they would, show that they had a plan that they showed. They do this thing called showing the plan. And then we go to conventions and events. And one weekend they were away in an event, and I was staying with my grandparents, and my uncle and aunt came down. And they're like, "What's this Amway thing your parents are in? What's this? What are they doing?" And I'm like, "Well, let me ask you a few questions. If time and money was no object, what would you do with your life?" And they're like, "What do you mean?" I'm like, "Well, like this is how you could grow a business. The products you buy every day, this is you, and then you get someone else to buy the products. They get someone else to buy the product." And I basically drew the whole plan out for them. And when they came back from that, my parents came back from that trip, my uncle and aunt said, "Hey, how do we sign up?" And they actually did very well in network marketing, my parents and my uncle and aunt. I mean, nothing astronomical, but they did really well. My uncle and aunt actually grew one of the largest legs in their business. So I think it's the things that kids subconsciously see. And I would say, like, there was various points in my life where I got bit by the entrepreneurial bug. I say it's like gray hair. It comes in gradually. And then all of a sudden, like, you're immersed in it and you're like, oh yeah, that's how I got here,
Well, it is pretty amazing the shaping that was happening, and how, again, often network marketing doesn't have the best, reputation at times, but the truth is so much of it was personal growth, personal development. And
Yep.
yeah, there's shady characters in some of those business, just like every business, right?
For sure.
So, brother, let me ask you, what was your journey into being an entrepreneur, and what you now do with helping consult? What was the driving force for you to say, look, I see that being an entrepreneur is, like you said, you're going to grab some gray hairs along the way, but next thing you know, it can be absolutely beautiful or absolutely brutal, and sometimes both. What was your experience as you got into the entrepreneur world?
Sure. So yeah, I shared with you some of the good side of my childhood. The bad side was I was a terrible student, which is ironic because my mom even worked in the elementary school that I went to. I was just never a good student. Got held back in first grade. Once again, one of the chapters in my book is called "I Failed First Grade," and I just was never really good. And it was always like, and my sister was always very smart, so she always did really well with school. And I grew up in the 80s and 90s, and in that time, it was like, hey, listen, if you don't do well in school and you don't get a degree and you don't go to college, you're going to be a loser. Like, that was the mantra in the 80s and 90s, right? Like, don't do drugs, because if you do drugs, you won't go to college and you'll be a loser, or get good grades and stay in school, because if not, you'll be a loser. Like, that was the mantra. And I even talk about this in the different things. My parents were in Amway, and Tim Foley was their kind of upline guy. He was on the 72 Miami Dolphins. Got to meet him once or twice, always gave me that advice. Hey, stay in school, do well. I was in the Boy Scouts. One of my troop leaders was Manny Fernandez. He was also on the 72 Dolphins. Stay in school, do well. That was the mantra, and I was never really good at that. So barely graduated high school by the skin of my teeth. Went to community college down here at Broward. Now it's Broward College. When I went, it was called Broward Community College, but we actually called it Beer Can College, because that's really all you did there was drink. And then I went to UCF, failed out, and just kind of loafed around for a few years. Didn't know what I wanted to do. Was working in restaurants, which I think every entrepreneur should work in a restaurant, because I think it's just the ultimate trial of learning how to become an entrepreneur. And one of my old teachers came in and said, hey, do you want to be a substitute teacher? And I said, man, that sounds like a really easy job. So I went in, did that, fell in love with education, ended up going back to school, finishing my degree in psychology, because that's kind of where I had the most credits. I think I majored in everything, and ended up teaching for the better part of a decade. Got married, started having kids, and was like, wow, how do I grow in this career? Right. So in education, and people could say teachers don't get paid enough. I couldn't believe they paid me to do it. I absolutely love teaching. And this is kind of a lesson I learned along the way. If you do what you love, the money finds you, right? And I said, well, wait a second, I do got to grow in this career, though, because as my second son's coming, so I went and got my master's degree in educational technology, which is ironic. First time I ever got, I think I got all A's and B's. I didn't get anything below a B, because I finally found something I was passionate about, and unknowingly went to go work for an educational startup. It was running out of a Catholic school, small online Catholic school. They kind of lied to me when they hired me for the job. But I stuck with it. We grew it to 34 different states, got investment from a guy by the name of Wayne Huizinga, who used to own the Miami Dolphins and Waste Management and Blockbuster and all that. He put about $14 million into the business. I was promised everything under the sun, stock options, equity, my own private plane. I got none of that. I was making a teacher salary the whole time. And as it grew and grew and grew, and then Wayne eventually sold the company, I ended up, when that ended, with nothing, and learned some lessons there. And I'm like, wait a second, like I could either go back to the classroom, or I've learned some stuff on this journey. I think I could help other businesses. I've spent the last 10 years, kind of the second half of my career. So I did 10 years in the classroom, and I've done 10 years as a consultant. And I think I'd help people, and started with educational companies, actually growing businesses. And now I've worked in every industry, you name it, from education, oil and gas, cigar, telecom. I mean, you name it, I've consulted for anything. So I say, I really don't know what I want to be when I grow up. I get to kind of choose my own adventure by the clients I take.
Well, I love the attitude that you've taken, because again, when you go through business and you've been promised, or that was the agreement that this is what's going to come, I can really sour somebody's taste in their mouth to be like, bro, I grew this thing to, I think you said 34, well-funded. I'm sure when they sold it, they did pretty well. And yet you didn't get that piece. You said, hey man, I learned some good lessons. What were those lessons? Because I want to dig into that, but more importantly, the way you smile today, the way you don't play the victim card. You clearly didn't get what you were offered, what you were promised, and yet your attitude is not cavalier. It's not that you don't care. This is a lesson that I needed to learn, or I benefited from it somehow.
Yep.
And I see many entrepreneurs, they don't have that, brother. They're still holding that chip on their shoulder, how they got screwed over. But that's clearly not the way you're showing up.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been, some people call it competitive, some people call it what you mean. I've never been someone that's like, I want to prove my haters wrong. It's just not in my mentality. I think it's, for me, it's just not what I do. That being said, I also believe too that like the decisions you make, and that I always own all my failures my entire life were always my fault. And I think most people don't experience that, right? Most people, their failures are on, and like I said, you look at even education nowadays, they'll say, well, the teacher didn't teach that right, or they didn't do this. Like, I know, like I fucked up in school because I didn't do my homework. I was screwing around. Like I got kicked out of UCF, not because it wasn't a good college, because I was working 2 jobs, because I didn't, do my homework. I didn't put my schedule right. I chose to party and do other things. When I failed at a young age, I failed because it was my fault. So I never looked to blame. I had no one else to prove wrong but myself. So like even to this day, like if I don't do something, it's not because you didn't give me the right assets, or you didn't do this, or something didn't happen. It's because I didn't do it. So even in that experience, and of course, yes, was there some dumb things that I did that I learned? Yes. Like, I mean, even in that whole situation, even being Italian, I grew up Italian. So if somebody said something, their word was their bond. You can see I got my little Italian sweater on here, right? Your word was your bond, right? I learned get it in writing. That was probably the biggest lesson I learned. Get it in writing. I had mentors that I don't think they were lying. Maybe they were lying to me in a sense, but like, maybe they thought too I was going to get something, and they were just encouraging me. It's not always taking. And I think when you're young and you're in your 20s and 30s, you look at people in their 40s and 50s and they're like, well, they must know because they're older, right? Like they must know because, and I think there's a very thin line between being like young and smart and energetic and thinking you're better than the older generation. There's a thin line between thinking, hey, I'm kind of subservient to them, for lack of a better word. You got to live somewhere in the middle, and I think I lived more on the side. And I would say, because I always saw my father as my mentor, so when these people came in, I said, man, I trust my dad. I'm sure these guys are older. I could trust them too. And that wasn't always the case, right? But lesson learned. It's kind of like, what are you going to do? I can't go back and change it, right? So all I could do is go forward and say, wait a second. I always say I didn't lose. I got more material to make something better.
Yeah, education is not cheap. Let's just go ahead and say it the way it is. When you learn some of these lessons, it can definitely take a toll, but what a priceless pay. You probably wouldn't go back and change it because of what you learned from it.
For sure.
This mindset that you have to at one point be like, dude, I wasn't a good student, wasn't really interested. I went because that was what I was supposed to do. And then you end up going back, not only getting your undergrad, but then you get your master's degree. Clearly something clicked for you. And I call it a growth mindset, where it's not that school was bad. And I love that you just owned it. Like, look, man, I wasn't ready for it. It wasn't the right time for me. But your mindset is just fascinating, that you're like, not only am I now a great student, I'm getting these master's degrees. Where did that come from, brother? That is, I call it growth mindset. It's my favorite thing. It's something I talk about relentlessly. I think it's a beautiful book that Carol Dweck had put out, or, years ago. But it seems like you adopted that way before it was known as a growth mindset.
I mean, I think, and I believe in growth mindset firmly, right? I agree with you 100%. That being said, the seeds don't grow unless someone's watering them, right? And I would say the seeds can't water themselves. So I think it was a lot of who I was surrounded with. It was the environments I was in. I was in a place where in my educational career, I was teaching in a unique way. It was, kind of like that late 2007 to 2010 period. I was doing a lot with, the iPad just came out. I was using technology. I had a podcast in my car and all this stuff. So people were now basically watering that growth mindset, if you will. They were watering the seed and saying, hey, you're really an innovative teacher. You're really good at this. You're really good at that. Where when I was in the other situations, it was, hey, well, if you don't get, like I said, the feedback was, if you don't do well in school, you're not going to be successful. Now it was like, man, you're innovative. So even though I maybe had a growth mindset as a kid, there was nowhere for me to grow. There was no one watering my seeds. You know what I mean? So I think it's that environment that you're in. And I think the switch, I think there's a lot of people, and I saw this when I taught, there was a lot of kids I used to pull aside and say, listen, I get it. This is just not the place for you, but you got to get through it, right? And I guarantee you, when you get out of here, I know more kids that were honor students and AP kids that are fucked up on drugs, not have good jobs, and they're just not doing well. And the kids that everybody gave a hard time for, got a lot of demerits, were always in trouble, maybe did drugs, are now the kids that own businesses and are successful and are doing the things and are happy. The smartest kid I went to school with is not necessarily the most successful kid now, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there's some kids, don't get me wrong too, there's some kids I went to school with that were very smart, that went on to do great things, that got great jobs, that are making a lot of money now. That's also available. So I think it's just, where are your seeds being watered, and are you planted in the right place? That's the key, right? And I think you can have, because I see a lot of people with the growth mindset that are just, and once again, it goes back to the book, right? They're saying it like socks on a rooster, but do they really know what it means? So I think there's internal things that the seed needs to do to grow, but there's also external factors, sunlight, water, so, being in the right soil. You got to make sure all those things are firing on all cylinders, because if it's just the seed, it doesn't grow till it's planted. And I think that's the key. I was planted in the right place to be able to grow.
Yeah, man. And it is interesting to see the mindset shift. Obviously, an education does not guarantee you anything other than that piece of paper.
It's a key. You got to find the door.
Yeah. It's a potential, that you're meeting some great people, but it is fascinating how that mindset has shifted, even societally speaking, where it's more accepted now. If you don't go to college, fine. But you have that drive, find that passion, find that purpose. And you hear that all the time, brother. Is finding your purpose, is that watered down at this point? Is that all just cliche talk? Or is your experience with entrepreneurs that have succeeded, like you said with teaching, the money will come because you loved it? I'm just curious on your thoughts on this, because so often people are like, okay, great, I want to sit and watch Netflix all day. That's not going to pay my bills. But the truth is, it could, right? And that's what I wanted to ask you is like, my best friend, if he's listening right now, he's kind of looking, and he is brilliant when it comes to breaking down movies. And he spent so many time. I'm like, dude, there's probably a business there. You just have to want to make something of it. What are your thoughts on that, brother?
I mean, look, there, like I said, I think it goes back to the statement of the watering, right? Like you could watch Netflix all day, write a blog, do a podcast, and it depends on what your lifestyle is. If that's all you want to do, I mean, you can make it. I tell people, it is very easy to replace a $50,000 to $75,000 a year job as an entrepreneur. Easy. It's a little bit harder, but not that hard to, let's say do between $1 and $1.50, right? You go above that, it's a little more difficult. I will say the entrepreneurs I worked with, and somebody posted this on Facebook yesterday, and I was like, it's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And it goes back to they were one of the, I don't want to say what industry they're in because I don't want to knock it, but they basically said entrepreneurship cannot be a part-time thing. You have to be all in. First of all, I don't think anyone could define what entrepreneurship is. I think it's become like a spirituality. It's like it's different for everybody. It's how you adapt it. And I saw someone else on the same day post just that entrepreneur is a mindset, right? It's how you think, it's how you feel, it's what you do. You could have a job and be entrepreneurial. I say there's a teacher out there right now that's going into their principal's office because it's the end of the school year, and they say, I saw the school year go this way, and I want to implement this new program next year so it helps my kids. And I'm going to spend all summer preparing it and all summer getting it ready, and I'm going to roll it out. And they're excited to just do that. They're not going to get more money. They're not going to get a raise in position. It's not going to change what they do. They're just serving what they do and serving the people of what they do. There's someone going into their boss right now and saying, hey, I've got an idea of something that can help the company. They're not going to make more money. They're not going to do anything else. They just know that they're going to go in and make a change. So I think purpose is, once again, it's so easy to say things nowadays, and it's so easy to act them out on social media. It's much harder to action it, right? Every entrepreneur that I've worked with that wanted to make money eventually failed. And I don't mean that in a way that they were only focused on money. I mean that in that it became about the dollars and cents so much that they didn't know what they were doing. Some of the most successful entrepreneurs I've worked with have been the ones that said, okay, it started as a small idea. They planted the seed and they just kind of watered it every day. Well, let me see what happens. Let me see what happens. And then all of a sudden, wait a second, I got $1 million business. Now what do I do? Right. And I'm not to say that I haven't seen the other way. I've seen people that had a good idea, and if it clicks and it hits and it runs, it goes. So it just depends on, I think, purpose and profits. One of them has to lead. One of them have to lead, but eventually they also have to balance out, right? Because even if you grow this huge business and you're passionate about it, if you're not managing finances right, I've seen that too, where it just sucks the life out of a business. And on the same hand, I've seen people with very little passion, but very smart with money and process be able to make money. So I think it just depends on what you want to do. The beauty of it is today, and you mentioned college before, people even ask me, well, like, you know, did you, in Florida, we had the Florida Bright Futures, right? Where you could start paying for college at the age that they were born. And then that's it. And I'm like, why? First of all, why would I invest in that when I could do other investment, vehicles like a 529 or whatever it is that would be much better? And second of all, I'm not going to sit here and tell this 3-minute old what they're going to be when they're 18. So I think it's a matter of the process now, but the options for my son when he graduates high school versus the options for me when I graduated high school are very different. So, it's finding where that is. And I think you have to decide. And some people work for profit and are happy and shut off at 5 o'clock and watch Netflix all night. And that's okay. And then there's some people I know that grind 16 hours a day and still can't figure it out. So like who won in that? It's a tough question. It's a tough question.
Yeah, it is. And you mentioned having 4 kids. I mean, the truth is all 4 of your kids without ever meeting them are different. That's a fact. And so putting a box or a label like, all right, like you said, 3-minute old, you're going to go to a Florida school and it's locked in at this price. And that's not the way this really needs to ever play out. Look, if your child chooses, and I'm not pro college, I'm not against college, right? I went.
Same here.
My wife did. My wife is very pro college, and that's cool. I understand why. But the truth is, everyone's journey is different. And for us to put it in a box, say, this is how you're going to go be successful, that's just not the way of the world, man. It certainly isn't today. There's a topic that you have on here, and I love this because I feel like I've got this part down pretty good, which is why you don't need to be the smartest person in the room. Mm-hmm. Rarely do I feel like I'm the smartest person in the room. And if I'm in that room, I'm in the wrong goddamn room. Like, I don't want to be in the room where I know the most. That's just never for me. What do you mean? What do you look for when you're looking for that, brother? Am I going down that's my path where I like to be surrounded by people that are brighter than me, that are inspiring me to do other things. And I don't want to be the smartest person in the room. So what are you saying with this topic? What are you seeing?
I always love to preface it too. You could be in front of the room too and not be the smartest person in the room. So I think a lot of people mistake that statement too with where you're at in the room, right? So I think it's twofold. There's always something to learn from somebody, right? There's always someone that can offer insight and offer knowledge and be able to teach you. And I think smart is, and I love saying that the smartest person in the room because it varies, right? Like I'm not saying education. I mean, it could be experience. It could be, tactile. I mean, listen, if a toilet breaks in my house and I don't know how to fix it and the plumber comes over, he's the smartest person in the room. You know what I mean? And sometimes people don't know how to get into that mindset of and I've seen it in so many situations where, well, you don't know what you're talking about. Well, shit, if you don't know how to fix it, that guy's now the smartest person in the room. So I think it's a matter of a mindset of humbleness, but also a mindset of growth, right? So also like you were saying before, like how do you grow and how do you learn from other people? But it's in all scenarios and all situations. Sometimes when I'm in the room and if I'm, I played, Nintendo since I was, 8 years old. But now when I sit in a room with my son and he's 15 and he plays video games on his Switch, he knows how to do all this stuff. I'm no longer the smartest person in the room, even though I've been doing it longer. So it's knowing when and where to humble yourself to be able to learn. And sometimes too, it's also knowing where to step up and be the leader in the room. Doesn't necessarily mean you always have to be the smartest person in the room. So I would say, even on my team, I sometimes have to lead, but that doesn't mean I'm the smartest person in the room just because I'm leading my team. So it really depends on the situation where you're at. And I think it's about humbleness, and it's about direction. Like, where do we want to go? How do we want to move forward?
Yeah. And some of the great examples that recently, I think of Elon Musk. He's a smart dude, no question.
For
Does
sure.
he have really brilliant engineers and technical people around him? Absolutely. Steve Jobs, the master of being a visionary that said, go make the impossible happen. He wasn't the one doing it, but the vision that he created. And I think that's the point, is as that leader, he was cool with not being the smartest, but the vision was there. What do you, when you're working with entrepreneurs, the successful ones, helping them shape that vision so that true buy-in can take place, like you mentioned, with the people on the team? Because that's when I see entrepreneurs take off. When they get that vision down, they can paint that brush and everybody's vision can fall inside of it and grow inside of it. Is that kind of what you're seeing with the clients you're working with, the ones that are successful, is that they have that vision down pat?
Yeah, I think they have the vision down pack. I think the hardest thing to do sometimes, though, is to get them to, I say is like, we got to beat 80%, guys. And pulling them back, because a lot of times I get entrepreneurs that are coming in on that, like, man, I started this and I grew, and now I want to build a team, or now I want to grow out. Those are the hardest ones sometimes, because they've been doing everything. And I said, we're going to hand this off. And well, they won't do it as good as I will. I said, yes, they will not. I said, but you have to be okay with 80%. I said, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take that time that you got freed up with, even though it's not 100%. And here's how we're going to grow. So I think sometimes it's teaching them how to not be great in some ways, and how to accept, like, okay, this is where I could give up, but more importantly, where do you need to hold quality, right? And where does it make your product great? And always, how do we duplicate you? Because I think with entrepreneurs, the mindset is always, some of them are like, well, only I can do it. And I think the scariest business you could start is one that's just dependent on you. And we see that, and once again, the internet has allowed this, right? That solo entrepreneur. I'm working with a woman right now. Amazing story. She wants to break off and do other things. She has a company over here. She's like, but this company over here is really dependent on me, but I kind of want to do more of this. And I'm like, well, it's not dependent on you. You just think it is. So we're detaching her from the things that are important, so she can go over here and do what she's passionate about and generate revenue over here. So it really varies on the entrepreneur themselves, but sometimes it's just about being, really, sometimes it's holding them back. They're almost too great. And I'm like, let's turn it down. My partner in Brand Ethos, which is the marketing company that I'm co-owner of, she always says, sometimes we got to slow down to speed up, Alicia Lashetsky. And it's one of my favorite sayings, because we do. Sometimes we have to slow down, and then that's how we speed up and we're able to move forward.
It is amazing how fast that can happen too, when you start this business and, okay, when I do it, this happens this way. And I can count on that. Mike, when I do it, I can count on it being done the right way. But the moment you've done that, you've 100% put a cap on your growth. And that's probably one of the big things that obviously you helping this woman realize, like, look, if you empower someone else to do that, now you can go pursue this other passion, continue to grow, providing more opportunities. How do you help her really get rid of that control, holding on to it, brother? Because that's a tough one for many entrepreneurs, because if I do it, Mike, I'm going to do it right, and I know the job's going to get done.
For sure. I mean, I think it comes down to people, right? I always say automation will kill your business. It comes down to people. I think automation can help your business. I don't think it's going to change and be the life story. And that's just me personally. And we put systems in place all the time. I've taken people that are doing things paper, pencil, and a notebook, and created a whole back office, and now it runs smoother because we digitized and did things. But I think it comes down to, as an entrepreneur, you have to put somebody underneath you that you trust to hand that off with, that either fills a weakness for you or could be just as good at the skill you are. So it's really about the people you bring on the team and expanding that out, right? Because it has nothing to do with the processes. It has nothing to do with anything. It's as much as it's, first, you have to have the person you trust. It's like a marriage and having kids, right? If you have kids and you're a husband and wife and you believe in the same things, and you have the thing, why do you date first? Why do you, in an ideal situation, you date first, you get married, you have kids. Why? So you go through the process of making sure, no, wait, we're ready to have another person to pass the process along and allow them to go out and produce, right? It's the same thing in your business. You got to find the right people to partner with or put underneath you. Then the process will fall in place. Like you mentioned, Steve Jobs, I saw another video from him as well. He goes, I don't always hire the most talented person. I hire the person that buys into the vision and is a self-starter that I don't have to manage. If you could find those people, that's where the win is. And that's what I try to do with entrepreneurs, is say, okay, who's the person that we can find? Sometimes it's a good friend or a former coworker, or sometimes it's a daughter or son or a cousin, or it depends. But I think putting the trustful person, especially in the solo entrepreneur, putting the first person as a trustful person underneath is someone that you can really trust, not a stranger, not someone that you don't know. A trustful person makes all the difference.
How did you figure out your strengths versus your weaknesses? Because I think that's where I see people often get stuck. It's like, I suck at, for instance, I'll just use me, technology, not a strength of mine. I told you I have a growth mindset. I'm all about trying to get better, but the truth is I don't love it. And I know that's a weakness. Therefore, I empower others to really bring that to fruition. How did you figure out for you, brother, what your zone of genius, where you're like, dude, I'm really good at this? How did that come to you? Because often I see entrepreneurs struggle with this idea of, I'm not sure what I'm really great at, but once they do, it's like everything takes off. Their business explodes. They're happier. They're not doing the work that they don't like, even if they're good at it. How did you figure out that for yourself?
I think before I could even figure that out, I had to realize I don't have to do everything. And that was the hardest thing for me. Because like I said, when we go back to what I talked about, not being the good student and being the failure and the mistakes I made, I a lot of times had to figure out, hey, how can I solve my own problems? So the first thing I had to realize was I don't have to do everything. And that was one of the hardest things for me to do, was like, oh, wait, I don't have to solve the problem. I can ask someone else to do it. I think that was the first part. In finding, I think in finding what I'm really good at and where I kind of said, I mean, it was really kind of just, I once again realized I didn't have any core skill, but people always came to me. And even when I was younger, even when I was even when I talk about not doing well in school, people were like, man, I never thought that about you, because you always seem so happy and you were always talking to everybody and you were always smiling in the hallway and you're always doing this, you're always doing that. I'm like, because I just didn't like it just didn't bother me. And more importantly, I didn't burden other people with my problems. I think a lot of people too love to burden other people with, man, how you doing? Oh, I don't know. I don't know. Like, I was like, oh, it's a lot right now. We're just really busy. Oh, like, hey, I'm great. You know what I mean? So I think it was just, my thing for me was not trying to be all things to all people. And then really just knowing to get in where I fit in. And then I always think of, like, the minute somebody, and this is almost a fault of mine though, the minute, even I've had clients even come to me and I'm like, yeah, I know this person, boom, 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 I can hook you up with them. They're like, no, we want you. I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm like, I thought you were coming to me for advice, just how to get people. So I sometimes have to step back and be like, oh, they do want my expertise and I hate to call it genius, but I also think it's ever evolving, right? Because I think even with, and I think we sell ourselves short. Like you even saying you're not good with technology. Well, you're here on a podcast. You got headphones and a microphone on. You got a team that's going to put this out. I mean, like what does that mean, right? Like I would say, like why would you say that about yourself? You're ahead of where you maybe not be in the NFL, but you definitely can throw a ball. You know what I mean? So it's sometimes getting that mindset of like, well, wait a second, and that's what I mean. We don't have to be perfect. Like, I live in a happiness of 80%. I really do. Like if I'm at 80%, life is good, man. And I'm not striving for the 100. I'm striving for the 80. And then I'll let the other 20 take care of itself. Because I truly believe if you get the 80% right, too many people focus on that last 20 and try to get it right, that they forget about the 80. And I live in the 80.
Yeah, perfection is the enemy of greatness is what comes to mind as you say that, because so often I got to get it 100% right before I, like the book, right? There's a guy that recently he was publishing a book, and I said, I won't say his name, but I was like, hey, dude, I'd love a chance to get he's like, I'm working on the 17th revision. I'm like, 17? What are you waiting for? And once he did publish it, how many people he helped, but it wasn't perfect in his eyes. And I'm like, that's life, brother. It's never going to be perfect. You have a topic here. I love your topics because they create conversation, just like the title of your book. And the topic here is why you should eat steak with your team to create high achievers. Where are you going with that, brother? I mean, I'm a steak and potato guy from Montana. I'm all in on this. However, what are you talking physically about steak? What are we talking about?
Yeah. I mean, physically going to a steakhouse. I'll never forget the first big trip. I talked about that company at Wayne as the first big trip I took was Chicago, and I'm kind of set in my ways. I like staying in the house. They're like, you can stay at this guy's house, and he's gonna pick you up at the airport. I'm like, what the fuck is this? I don't want to stay at some guy's house. Like who knows where I'm gonna be? comes and picks me up in this beautiful Infiniti QX45. Keep in mind, I drove to the airport in my busted up Nissan Sentra, and drives me to Chicago, and we go to this amazing steak dinner in Chicago. And I mean, we're eating, drinking scotch, having steak. Go back to this guy's house. He's got a big house. And it was like my first foray into like, whoa, there's like a whole nother world. Like I had steak before. It's not the first time I ever ate steak, but like first time I went to a really nice steakhouse and I had a really nice steak dinner. And I like immediately felt connected. And we actually did a lot of great work together, still keep in touch. And every time I've worked with a team, I've always done that. And even it's funny, I was just in West Virginia working with one of my clients, and we went out and we ate every night at a steakhouse, and then we went also in the airport. We got in the American Airlines on. She's like, "You ruined me for travel," because she always went with the CEO, and she's like, "Usually I go with her." And like, yeah, we kind of like eat Chick-fil-A or McDonald's at night. She's like, "You ruined me," but it's like we had such great conversations at dinner. Even my team, two of the guys on my team, when they first started, we were like, yeah, we used to like think like Outback was good steak or like Longhorn. They're like, now we can't go to like, we either go to Ruth Chris or Mastro's or someone like that. It elevates their thinking. It puts you in a different environment. And there's just something about sitting down, breaking bread together and eating, I don't want to say the flesh of slaughtered animals, but there's something about eating a good steak. I eat my steak rare. I drink scotch. It's kind of like a part of my, as I was saying, scotch, cigars, and rare steak are kind of like my brand, but I think it's a building a community. It's a coming in together. And if you don't take that time away from work, away from whatever it is, you don't grow as people. And I think there's nothing better you can do, I think, than sitting down with somebody and breaking bread, and more importantly, picking up the check. I think is important. And it's just a great team building exercise.
Well, I love the story you started with. Why am I going to stay at somebody's house? You already have this negative idea of like staying at some dude. I just want to be alone on my trip. When the truth is that the experience of spending time with this individual, then seeing that he's operating at a high level, how that rapidly shifted your thinking. And I think, again, so often that's really all it is that mindset, that cap, because of whatever background you came from, or, whatever hardwires that you have. It takes the lid off that thing and says, look, Mike, there's a whole big world out there. It's not about the steak per se. It's about experiencing this and knowing that there's so much more out in this world. That's awesome.
Yep. And that meal was 13 years ago. It's still the screensaver on my phone.
Unbelievable. So that's one of your triggers, what I would call that, right? That's like that positive trigger to say, this was my humble beginning and it still inspires me today.
For sure.
That's beautiful. The last one on this topic, and again, I just read them off. Normally I don't, but I like the way you talk about these, how your personal brand can help you with your connections to your team. How does that coincide, brother, that your brand is going to help the connection with your team?
Yep. I mean, look, let's be honest now, everyone's watching. And I don't care whether you're 14 or 114. Pretty much everyone's online today. You mentioned the technology thing before. I mean, even, I always get around, like someone told me, I was in a meeting and they're like, well, technology really doesn't fit people in their 70s. I'm like, well, I get it. But like, even like my dad, and I'm like he's in his 60s. I'm like, oh wait, no, he just turned 70 this year, but like, he's on his iPhone. Like everyone's watching you. Right. I know when I hire an employee, I do the social media stalking. I do the Google deep dive, and they're doing the same thing on you. Right. And I think it's, I always say with social media, it's not about the 3 likes or the 6 views but even yesterday, my neighbor walking down the street, oh, I watch your TikToks all the time. I love them. She's never liked one of them, but like we had like a 15-minute conversation about one of them I posted that I know she didn't like because I went back and looked at it. People are watching. I think, we're going to tell our team what we want to do on a Zoom call. We're going to tell our team what we want to do in an email. We're going to tell our team how we want to be. But if they see you out there, like living like you mentioned before, the passion and the mission of the company and what you're doing, and that doesn't mean you're always talking about business, but it's seeing the balance. And, I'm very transparent online about my family and what we do and the activities and the rewards and how we get there. It gives sometimes people a true north to look at. And more importantly, I think, you don't take it. Most people aren't taking a job nowadays. And you mentioned this before, I think they're looking to be a part of a team or a family or an organization that means something. And if you're not putting that out there, and like I said, I've taken jobs where I've joined things where it wasn't what I expected. And maybe if there was, I could have maybe seen some of the signs if I look for it in the other areas. And I think where there's not information nowadays, people are filling in the blanks. And you mentioned it sometimes, like I did on the trip, people fill it in with the negative. So why not, why let them fill it with the sour when I could give them sugar, and I'd rather put it out there and do that. And I think it helps, and it helps people connect. it helps people see who you are, and it helps people make the decision of like, wow, do I really want to be a part of this, even during the hard times, right? Because if it's a hard day, or maybe you had to get on somebody and they go on your social media and they see a funny video, you're going to be like, yeah, that's right. I remember Mike is a good guy. Mike really is out here for us. Like, I know we had that moment, or maybe it was me, and, you're able to get back to that, or maybe Mike was just having a bad day. They see the bigger picture of who you are, and they see what you're doing. And more importantly, they also get to become a part of your story as well, which I think is really neat.
Yeah, to really show that, I think that was one of my biggest hangups, is because so often I was like, I don't want to put all my stuff out there. Why does anybody care that I don't know, whatever I'm doing this evening? But the truth is, people do want a glimpse into your life, know exactly who you are. Can I trust you? Yep. It's, this is an authentic person. I think that's beautiful the way you're doing that. Brother, I can't believe how fast this is going by. What didn't I know enough to ask you, where you're just like, JM, we got to share this with the audience before we start to wrap up?
No, man, I feel like we covered a lot of it. You did a great job. I mean, I would say the one thing is, and like I kind of mentioned earlier, you kind of mentioned, you're uncovered with technology, and I only want to hit on that again because you're podcasting, and I think podcasting really is one of the most important things you could do nowadays. And I congratulate you. Watched a bunch of your episodes before coming on. I think it's important that we're doing this, right? Because people like you and I sitting down, telling the stories, sharing them. You never know who's going to hear them. And just like that book, like you talked about that guy, I wanted to be perfect. Every interview I do is different. Everyone I have on my podcast, every story is different. And you never know whether it's today, tomorrow, or this, some of this stuff could live forever, right? Who's going to hear that one nugget that you said that one time? So I think if you're not podcasting, or you're not being a guest on great podcasts like this, and if you're listening and you've never been a guest on JM's show, you definitely got to reach out to him, because he does a great job interviewing you, makes you feel comfortable. I really think it's an opportunity for people to grow. So if you're not in the podcasting space, I highly encourage you to get into it.
I can't second that enough. Literally, people ask me all the time. They're like, do you make money podcasting? I'm like, well, yes and no. It's such a hard question to answer because so many deals have come from it. But the truth is, I don't care if it costs me $100,000 a year. I will always continue to do it because of meeting amazing people like yourself, hearing these stories. I get inspired every single podcast. I come in one way and I am lifted up every single episode. So brother, I cannot second that enough. Mike, if somebody wanted to really, look into what you're doing, connect with you online, they're like, look, man, I want to be a more successful entrepreneur. I want to smile the way Mike's smiling the whole time. Where's the best place to do that?
Your local steakhouse. No. So MikeFicara.com, real easy. Just my name, MikeFicara. I only spell it because it's spelled wrong in my high school yearbook. But MikeFicara.com goes to my website. That's also my handle on all social media accounts. Shoot me a DM, connect with me. Always love to connect and learn more. And like I said, break bread or just talk. I love helping people and then seeing where it goes from there.
That's beautiful, brother. Well, you have so much knowledge, and yet it's such an easy conversation with you, brother. I just appreciate the way you show up, and just a happy dude, man. That like everybody needs a little bit of that in their life. So I appreciate that.
Awesome. Oh, thank you. I appreciate you having me on, and appreciating your audience taking the time to listen to this. So appreciate you listening.
Audience, you heard him. Share this. Put a little Mike Ficara into everyone's world. Let them experience that scotch, that rare steak, and that smile, because it was beautiful. And so much of what he talked about, I just think it's applicable tools to life that he's talking about, and yet it's not talked about enough. So make sure and share this with someone that you love. And until next time, remember, your mindset matters. I appreciate you all. Thank you so much for listening. If this content is delivering value to you, please make sure to subscribe, rate, and review us. That helps us build this community, and that is what we are all about. Building this community as big as we can, helping as many people as we can, and deliver as much value as possible. Be sure to head over to letsgowinpodcast.com for information on my coaching courses, and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Let's Go Win 365. Let's go win and transcend in life.
This is the Let's Go Win podcast with your host, JM Ryerson.